Good evening and welcome to our study tonight, the Wednesday before the Resurrection Sunday that we are so excited to have. Let me give you a little in the news. Speaking of excitement, this is probably anti-excitement, but let me give you a little bit in the news of what's going on. Let's talk about Israel. This is this week. It's outrageous betrayal of Israel. Biden training and arming Palestinian troops. The Biden administration is currently training and arming several thousand Palestinian Authority troops. Axios said about the Joint Security Summit that included the Secretary of the Executive Committee of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, his name is Hussein al-Sheikh, and the head of the Palestinian General Intelligence Service, Majed Fahaj, and the diplomatic advisor to President Muhammad Abbas, Majdi al-Qaid. Also in attendance were the heads of the intelligence of Jordan and Egypt. Now let me tell you what this is about. What they're trying to do is train these Palestinians so they can do security in their home front in the Gaza Strip. Even though that's the shadow of it, there's a lot more going on here. According to Glick, who is from the U.S. Department Security Coordinator, he said it provides for the military training of 5,000 Palestinians in counter-terrorism and commando tactics. At the end of the training, the Palestinian officers will bring with them 5,000 rifles and additional anti-terror equipment to Palestinian cities and towns inside Samaria and the areas surrounding Hebron. You'll learn about Samaria today in our later study. The plan also foresees the deployment of foreign forces, including U.S. military forces on the ground. The program aims at establishing a force of nearly 5,000 trained Palestinian soldiers. My question is, why? Why would they need to have training, military training, of these 5,000 Palestinian soldiers? None of the instructors will be U.S. government personnel, although Biden is pushing this. The new program proposed by the Biden administration provides guns and bullets and the training to use them, creating a special force of armed PA security forces. You have to scratch your head a little bit and wonder why we are training special forces in Palestine. Well, what they're doing is, Palestinians, what they're doing is they use that against the Israelis. Reports by Israeli Channel 14, as outlined in the U.S. plan to train PA security forces in Jordan, Glick again pointed out the fact and the fatal flaw in the plan: the direct involvement of the PA security personnel in terrorist attacks targeting Israelis. These men are going to take their training and they're going to use it to target Israelis. At last month's summit in Jordan, aimed at calming the violence between Israel and Palestinians, Hadi Amr, the Biden administration's special representative for Palestinian affairs, who by the way should be fired immediately, promoted an American plan requiring Israel to sharply curtail counter-terror operations by the IDF. Now, let me get this straight. So the Biden administration wants to train 5,000 Palestinian Authority soldiers for terrorism. They want Israel, in the meantime, at the same time, to sharply curtail their counter-terrorism operations. It sounds to me that they're setting up Israel. Dr. Mordecai Kedar acknowledged that the plan to give commando training to PA forces was in place and ready to begin. He explained that this was bad for Israel, of course it is, since the PA security forces play an active role in terrorism. He explained that the intention of the Biden administration was focused on the Palestinian Authority. So why are they doing it? Well, let me cut to the chase and let me not give you all of this because it doesn't tell you. I'll tell you. The reason why they're doing it is Muhammad Abbas is going to resign very soon. His terms are over, I should say that. And a new power authority is going to come in to the Palestinian Authority. America's worried. They're worried that they're not going to be able to control any of this, and so they're trying to put their 2 cents in to a spot where they should never be. The Palestinian Authority, which supposedly directed this new elite armed forces, is itself a terrorist organization that incites and pays Arabs to murder Jews. So now we're going to train 5,000 of their soldiers to be better at killing Jews. This outrageous proposal would result in the murder of more Israelis and must be opposed and scrapped. This is yet another brilliant plan proposed by a totally inept Joe Biden. Let me say it one more time. A totally inept Joe Biden. Let's go a little bit further. This man all by himself and whatever powers that are pushing him is getting America into deeper and deeper trouble, not only domestically, but also in his foreign affairs. This one is from our economics. The dollar is in trouble. And, we don't really see this because we go to a store and we spend our money and pretty much nothing changes for us. You get paid, You get a direct deposit in your bank, or you get a check and you go cash it, and really nothing changes. We see inflation coming crazy, going crazy, and our paychecks aren't meeting the inflation percentages that are going up. But for the most part, we take that. Americans just continue to do it. We continue to buy gas. We continue to buy food. Of course, we're living, but we don't realize what's happening in the global market. We have no knowledge of it. We won't know until after the fact. Unfortunately, most Americans react after the fact. This one you really need to hear and take notice of, because it is big time economic news. The dollar is in trouble. BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, nations developing new reserve currency. Those nations, it's an acronym, stands for Britain, Russia, India, let me see if I remember it, China, and South Africa. For decades, the United States dollar was the undisputed king of global currencies. Any other nations in the world wanted to buy something, real goods, especially from America or any other place, or oil, they had to do it. They had to change their money into US dollars. Well, obviously it made the dollar extremely powerful and strong. But now, dramatic changes are happening. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. It's about to change. China, Russia, India, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia, I said South Africa, sorry, it's Saudi Arabia, and other nations are making really big moves which will enable them to become much less dependent on the US dollars in years ahead. This will affect us. It's really bad news for us. Having the primary reserve currency of the world has enabled us to enjoy a massively powerful standard of living. We have the best in the world. That may go away. Once we lose that status, our lifestyles will be much different than they are today. Unfortunately, most Americans don't understand any of this. Even though our leaders have treated the stability of our currency with utter contempt in recent years, most Americans just assume that the dollar will always reign supreme. It will not. It's starting to fall away right now. Meanwhile, much of the planet is preparing for a future in which the United States dollar will be far less important than it is right now. Here's 7 signs that the global de-dollarization has just shifted into overdrive. Number 1, the BRICS nations account for over 40% of the total global population and close to 1/4 of global GDP, gross domestic product. So the fact that they are working to develop a new currency should greatly concern all of us. Number 2, two of the BRICS nations, China and Brazil, have just reached a deal to trade in their own currencies. They couldn't do that before. They would trade in American dollars. Now they're saying, we don't want to use the American dollars, which used to be very stable. We're going to trade our own currencies. That's not good for America. China and Brazil, 2 major emerging economies and BRICS members, reportedly reached a deal to trade in their own currencies, ditching the US dollar as an intermediary. 3, during a meeting last week in Indonesia, finance ministers from the Asian nations discovered ways to, quote, reduce dependence on US dollar, the euro, the yen, and the British pound. Number 4, in a move that has enormous implications for the petrodollar, oil dollars, Saudi Arabia just agreed to become a dialogue partner in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which doesn't deal with US dollars. First time ever. 5, the Chinese just completed their very first trade of liquefied natural gas that was settled in Chinese currency instead of US dollars. First time ever. 6, the government of India is offering their currency as an alternative to the US dollar in international trade. And lastly, 7, Saudi Arabia has actually agreed to accept Kenyan shillings as payment for oil shipments to Kenya instead of US dollars. Now, what's going on? Well, a couple things. Number 1, the dollar, and the world economies know this, and the governments, our dollar is losing ground because of inflation. And so as our dollar loses its value, other currencies can gain values. So once we have our dollar so inflated, other currencies are going to be more important and more stable than ours. And that's exactly what's happening. 10 years ago, none of these things would ever have happened. But now, change is happening at a pace that's absolutely breathtaking. John Carney is warning that a fracturing of global currency reserve is inevitable. Here's what he says. It's not only a serious threat, it's inevitable. We went through 3 stages after World War II. Listen to this. This is why we're the most powerful country in the world, or at least we have been. The US, number 1, was the biggest economy in the world after World War II. Then in the 1970s, global banking became basically dollar central around the world. And thirdly, with the fall of the Soviet Union, The entire world, more or less, came under the domination of the US dollar. Now that is falling apart. It's drifting away. China and Russia are starting to build an alternative block of currency. As US relations with both China and Russia continue to go downhill, and they are, both of those nations will have a very strong incentive to push de-dollarization even further. And why would they do that? Well, the obvious reason is if you devalue the dollar around the world, China and Russia step up as world powers because they're going to pull the rug out economically from the United States. And it's really bad news for the United States because our currency is the source of our economic power and our military power. It's the most important thing that we export. We export dollars more than anything else because all the world needs it to trade. But obviously that is changing. And again, we may not realize the impact of that or the seriousness of that. I hope I am totally wrong. But in the years to come, very soon, we're going to see the impact on the United States. Let me give you a little bit about religion. Obviously recognize this chart, Covenant Presbyterian Church, where the shootings in Nashville occurred last week. Media narrative after shooting. Christianity is the problem, not the solution. For the 7 families whose lives changed forever Monday morning, there's no making sense of the heartbreak. Immediately, the left turned loose its attacks and its attack dogs, savaging Drake and the media for misgendering the shooter that everyone had rightly described as a woman within hours. Both the USA Today and the New York Times apologized for calling Audrey a female, ultimately editing stories and headlines to appease the unappeasable mob who have fostered hostility for those who refuse to yield to their dangerous and destructive charade. I'm going to get myself in trouble, and I really don't care because I'm going to say this. Let me get off the script for a moment. Why are we letting a transgender society, violent transgender society, hijack our nation? Why are we letting them hijack our businesses? Why are we letting hijack everything that's there? I understand somebody may have a problem with their gender. I understand it. I have sympathy for that. But that doesn't mean that need to push it down our throats in every single turn. I am totally sick of it. Totally sick of it. And if nobody else says it, I'm going to say it. Hours later, the blame game began in earnest. None of this would have happened, activists said, transgender activists, if society were more accepting of the trans ideology. That is a downright lie. If Audrey's parents had just been more open to her male identity, if status had just stopped banning drag shows and had stopped banning drag shows and kids' gender transition. So what they're telling us, the media is telling us that this all happened because people were against transgenders. Let me tell you something. I grew up Italian in a neighborhood where Italians and Polish people fought back and forth. We never blamed each other. It was just the way it happened. I'm not crazy about the fights. We shouldn't fight. We should love everyone. But on the same hand, we're not supposed to make enemies. That's what Hitler did. Hitler made enemies of the Jews, and what he did was he rallied a nation around his enemies. And the poor Jews, they didn't do anything to hurt him, although he made up and contrived things that they did. This is transgenders going directly at Christians. And I'm going to tell you, there's not many of them when it comes to population, but they're extremely vocal and now extremely violent. One NBC reporter even went so far as to lay responsibility at the feet of conservatives for fighting to protect children from transgender ideology that so obviously haunted Hale. Here's what they said. The GOP have decided that guns are more important than kids. Actor Josh Gad argued. They have decided it's okay to let kids die. If she was a victim of anything, others claimed it was intolerant brainwashing and religious indoctrination. Then came the ridicule. He said this, is it possible they weren't praying enough? Can you imagine the insensitivity? That's talk show host David Palkman. He mocked the school. He said, if prayers alone worked, there wouldn't have been a mass shooting at a school where they pray. One gun control activist scoffed. Can you imagine what they're saying? It's an attack against God. It's an attack against you, and it's an attack against me. Make no mistake, a storm is brewing in this country that screams Christianity is the problem. The calls come, if they haven't already, for the faithful to step back from cultural engagement, to acquiesce on biblical truths. Where the battle is raging, the fiercest for our children. And let me tell you, the biggest cowards are pastors. And repeat it. Biggest cowards are pastors that won't address sin. Homosexuality is a sin just like adultery is a sin. When you whitewash it, you change the Bible. We're all sinners. There's no question about that. But when someone stands up and says, God made me this way, he made me do these things that are against his word because he loves me, we have a really warped idea. That's being a God unto yourself. Now the inclination will be known to move away, and this will happen at the church. The inclination, mark my words, you're already doing it, will be to move away from biblical truth, the very source of our hope and freedom that confused and troubled souls like Audrey needed. These tragedies, whether they're in Nashville or Newton, are a bitter fruit of deception that's destroying us. It's time to address these lies with urgency, acknowledging that we are a broken people in need of the God that we keep pushing away. We've been called, as Ezekiel was called, to speak the word of God in dark days, no matter the cost. Now listen to Ezekiel's words. I'm quoting. Be not afraid of them, nor be afraid of their words. You shall speak my words to them, whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house. He's talking about Israel, how they rebelled and wanted to do everything they wanted to do, and didn't want have any morals or any moorings, and just were going away from God. This is exactly what's happening in America. It's happening in rapid succession, faster than I've ever seen. And I, for one, I'm going to stand up against it. Not against people. God loves people. We know that. He loves a transgender as much as he loves somebody who's an atheist, as much as he loves somebody who's an agnostic or who's an adulterer. He loves them. That's not the issue. The issue is, can they do anything they want and thumb their nose at God and think that everybody else has to accept that? I don't. I have convictions, and you have convictions, and we need to stand by them and stand up for them. Speaking of news, let me give you a little good news. New David animated biblical movie becomes #1 crowdfunded movie. Tim Tebow, his role as an executive producer, in sports ball terms, he's batted 1,000 while winning the Super Bowl. His latest success has come in the theatrical world again, as Tebow is officially the executive producer of a record-setting film. The film David, based on the biblical figure, the same David and of Goliath, is being distributed by Angel Studios. The studio, alongside Tebow, announced this week that David had set all-time record in audience investment in a film. People are giving money to have this film developed. It was a record previously held by the biblical streaming series, The Chosen, but it's past The Chosen. The film has raised $50 million as of today. The goal is $61 million. The former Heisman winner was excited about the potential reach that this animated film could have and what it could mean for all those people. I am just grateful, he said. So many people are coming together to tell the story of David that I think will bring faith, hope, and love to so many people. He continued, and ultimately, that's our goal. Of note, if the whole style and vibe of the animation sort of reminds you of an animated Disney movie, that's intentional. David isn't backed by Mickey Mouse's blank checks, but a lot of people have defected from Disney, and they're one of the ones that have worked on this film. It's a much smaller venture, and one where you can see why the movie's producers sought crowdfunding to help accomplish its lofty goals. So what is the movie's goal? Create the most influential biblical animated movie since DreamWorks' Prince of Egypt. With a God-sized vision and a slingshot strategy, we believe that David could become the most watched animated film of all time, the movie site plainly states. Its purpose? Share this moving biblical story with a global audience, especially those outside the religious sphere. Given all of that, the prior statement stated success of The Chosen, it all does beg the question, why isn't Hollywood tapping into this rich vein when there's so clearly an appetite for quality biblical tales to get good silver screen adaptations? That appetite was so clearly seen when The Passion of the Christ was dominating the box office in 2004, and it's now so evident in 2023. With the growing apathy in the still dominant superhero movie genre, Tebow and Sunrise Studios could have a genuine chance to strike gold here with the families who want to go to the movies and not be bombarded with CGI and one-liners. David currently has an expected release in the year 2025. Let me go a little bit further and give you this one. I wish it was as uplifting as that one. Celebrating Evil, Satan Con sells out with largest satanic gathering in U.S. history. Should we be surprised? As our society comes apart at the seams all around us, Satan and Satanism are becoming extremely popular. Videos featuring Satan are getting millions of views on TikTok and YouTube. Millions of Americans are watching shows that feature Satan as a main character, or Netflix, or other streaming services. And the Satanic Temple has become one of the fastest growing religious organizations that the United States has ever seen. And I'm going to tell you the implications of that. Traditional American values are declining at a very rapid pace. If you don't think we're in the last days, you got to have your head in the sand. We are in the last days. Satan is giving his last push effort to get everybody he possibly can on his side. And it was inevitable that something would fill the void once Christianity starts to leave. In fact, turns out that Satanism's values, quote unquote, correspond almost perfectly with the values that much of the population has already embraced in this day and age. Once upon a time, most Americans were repulsed by anything that had to do with Satan. But now, Satan is eagerly welcomed into homes and hearts all over the nation. Today, Satan has become one of the hottest spiritual figures in America, and that is unlikely to change anytime soon. The following comes from a Newsweek article entitled Satan is Getting Hot as Hell in American Pop Culture. They say, on top of everything else, a major convention is coming up. It's being billed as the largest satanic gathering in the history of mankind, and it's being held in Boston at the end of April. This year's event is taking place in Boston, Massachusetts, from April 28th to 30th, 2023. It's titled Hexennacht in Boston, it's German, otherwise known as Witches' Night. On the announcement page, the Satanic Temple, TST, laments Boston Mayor Michelle Wu for her unconstitutional efforts to keep TST out of Boston public spaces, and announces that the event will be dedicated to her. She's against it. In return, purchasers are promised a, quote, weekend of blasphemy and remembrance. In the old days, maybe a few fringe weirdos would get together for something like that. But this year's SatanCon was completely sold out 6 weeks in advance. The Satanic Temple is the organization that runs the conference. It was established in 2012. Now it has more than 700,000 registered members. The Satanic Temple's website espouses such non-controversial tenets, listen to this, as forgiveness, empathy towards all creatures, and freedom, including the freedom to offend, I'm quoting. Its website boasts more than 700,000 registered members. By the way, the Satanic Temple, one of the fastest growing religious organizations in U.S. history. Last year's conference included a presentation on devil's food, abortion as a religious right, and raising children in a satanic household. Those were the topics. The organization also been active legally demanding the right, here it is, to abortion because members consider a religious ritual. Understand what I'm saying? And they're going to get this, by the way. They're saying that they're a religion and they believe in abortion. It's part of their tenets of faith. And so basically, if you discriminate against their belief in abortion, you're discriminating against a religious organization. One of the organization's core beliefs is that you're supposed to have complete freedom over your own body. Let me give you a little up-to-date understanding of the Satanic Bible that was written by Anton LaVey in 1966. They had the Satanic 10 Commandments. The first one was, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Let me repeat what they just said in this article. One of the organization's core beliefs is that you're supposed to have complete freedom over your own body. Is that not what the transgender and homosexuality and abortionists believe? Don't tell us what to do. They're becoming their own God. Citing its tenet that, here's they said, one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. Do what thou wilt. Satanic Temple has filed lawsuits on religious freedom grounds in states that limit abortion, claiming that abortion bans violate the rights of involuntary pregnant women to engage in a satanic abortion ritual. But it turns out that anyone that attends SatanCon must have proof of a COVID vaccination and wear a mask. So do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, but you're telling you got to wear a mask and have a vaccination? Somewhere down the line, someone has a screw loose. I thought you could do anything you want. The mask and vaccine requirements is ironic, as their About section states, the mission of the Satanic Temple is to encourage benevolence and empathy among all people, reject tyrannical authority, advocate practical common sense and justice, and be directed by the human conscience to undertake noble pursuits as you see possible. Well, so much for being consistent. They're a lie right off the bat. All right, let me give you a little bit more moral decay. This one is, trans activism reveals the pride at the heart of the transgender movement. And yes, I'm going to hit it hard tonight. Transgender activists aim to police the speech of Americans, particularly when it comes to preferred pronouns. But some of them do not extend the Almighty the same courtesy. Charlotte Clymer, a biological male who identifies as a transgender woman, recently took to MSNBC to claim that conservatives cynically weaponize and exploit the deaths of children by pointing out the fact that the woman who massacred 6 people in Nashville Christian school identified as a transgender. Clymer went on to misgender God and claimed that God made Clymer transgender. Here's what Clymer said. I served in the military. I go to church every Sunday. So do rats. There's churches that have rats in the basement. They go every Sunday too. My faith is very important to me, but God made me in her image. God made me transgender, Clymer said. Clymer, a transgender activist, tells us who God is. She's saying God is a she. Father, in masculine terms and with masculine pronouns, is used all over the Bible for God. Jesus refers to God as Father, John 10:30, John 14:9, Matthew 28:19, John 14:6, Mark 13:32, or my Father, as in our Father, Luke 2:49, John 14:2, Matthew 16:17. The Hebrew verb forms describing God's actions are masculine. In Psalm 68 and Isaiah 64, we refer to God as Father. The entire witness of Scripture and church tradition shows that God refers to himself using masculine pronouns. Confronted with this evidence, Clymer suggested that because Christians use God's preferred pronouns, they should use preferred pronouns for transgender people. Golly, you got to follow this logic. It's warped. The basic difference between the Creator, who is beyond space, time, and human characteristics like sexuality, and the creatures whom he created male and female are totally different. God is God. He's beyond our understanding. Human beings made male and female in biologically sexed bodies that are capable of reproducing in a dimorphic fashion have a clearly discernible sex with a clear reproductive purpose. The limit of our understanding of God does not apply to our understanding of sexed human bodies. Clymer wrote, I don't think it's the least bit wrong to refer to God as her, and I'm sorry that this apparently upsets people enough to write about it in papers in the aftermath of 6 human beings having been brutally murdered. God made human beings male and female, Genesis tells us, and the Mosaic law forbids cross-dressing. That's Deuteronomy 22:5. While some transgender activists have attempted to reinterpret obscure gender terms in the Talmud to claim that Judaism endorses transgender identity. The actual use of these terms reinforces, though, the binary of biological sex as God created, male and female. While people generally suffer from gender dysphoria, and I'm sorry about that, I have a compassion for that. I've counseled people with that. The persistent and painful identification with a gender's opposite a person's biological sex, it's a real thing. It remains unclear whether affirming a transgender identity actually improves their lives in the long run. More fundamentally, while cross-sex hormones and experimental surgeries can make a male body appear female and vice versa, listen to this. They cannot change either the chromosomal makeup of a person's DNA, nor a man's inability to produce eggs or vice versa. Transgender identity will always represent a form of rebellion against what Scripture and Christian tradition have taught to be the nature of God's creation. In insisting that God makes people transgender, Clymer is suggesting that Clymer knows better than the clear witness of Scripture and the tradition on those issues. By referring to God using a female pronoun, Clymer also suggests that Clymer knows God better than the biblical authors of the books of the Bible and the church over 2,000 years of history. Man, we got to just find out everything Clymer writes, because she's better than God, she's better than the prophet, she's better than the Word of God. These remarks illustrate the pride of man saying he knows himself, and even God, better than God knows himself. That kind of pride lies at the center of the transgender movement, and it's diametrically opposed to the humanity that should define followers of Jesus Christ. Psalm 2:3-11 tells us. Let's continue on because this is in the news and I'm going to hit it. Violent transgender activists and Antifa agitators shut down a pro-life event. Violent transgender activists and Antifa agitators interrupted the final Students for Life lies pro-choicers believe. It was a tour at Virginia Commonwealth University on Wednesday, and they shut the event down. The speaking tour, Students for Life of America, had the speaking tour concluded at Richmond, Virginia's public university in violence as police arrested protesters and forced the speakers to leave. Now, you're going to be surprised at this. One person, President for Life of America event, said, "This is what happens when our nation glorifies harmful ideologies, refuses to prosecute evildoers, and closes down open discussion. Antifa, so basically fascist, tried to silence us with their assaults. We were deeply disappointed in how campus and city police handled the incident as First Amendment rights were trampled upon and physical attacks were made due to the inaction. Pro-life speech is free speech, should have been firmly defended as such, especially at a public university." The student organization, Students for Life at VCU, invited a pro-life speaker to its meeting, which was open to the public and attracted about 70 people. The meeting was disrupted by an unruly conduct of some attendants, and VCU police were called in at 5:40 p.m. The school said that 2 individuals not related to the university were arrested. You're going to be interested to know who were arrested. Antifa agitators showed up to the event holding signs for Black Lives Matter and the transgender movement. Can you see the thread that's running through all of these? While goading other protesters in the crowd. Antifa, an organization known for instigating violence, caused numerous altercations between the protesters and the Students for Life staff. President of the Students for Life received a leg injury, while other students received scratches and cuts from the things Antifa threw. Antifa came for his fight, Students of Life America Executive Vice President Tino Whittington said. After the event, the protesters had 3 chants they kept recycling: fascists go home, Nazis go home, and an expletive that starts with F, pro-lifers. VCU police arrived and did not arrest the crowd of violent agitators, I'm going slow for emphasis, but instead asked the speaker to leave, to which she replied, "You'd have to arrest me to do that. I'm not leaving." This was not the first time Antifa had protested this specific speaker, but this instance was the most violent yet, according to Students for Life. According to Whittington, VCU police detained Students for Life team members and pro-life students while Antifa and the transgender activists were dispersed. Man, we need to see it coming. We are on the chopping block in America. If you're a Christian and you have values, you are on the chopping block. Speaking of it getting extremely weird in America, I don't even believe this one. I'm going to give you the last one, thankfully. More woke rebranding. Bud Light chooses transgender to be a spokesperson. Another week, another major American corporation hoisting the transgender flag to illustrate their woke credentials and their contempt for their customers. This time it's Dylan Mulvaney, the transgender TikTok star who skyrocketed to fame by engaging in grotesque parody of womanhood. And Bud Light, yep, that's right, Bud Light, the blue-collar beer, now featuring a man identified as a woman as its latest spokesperson to celebrate Mulvaney's 365 days of girlhood. 365 days of girlhood. For those of you privileged enough to have missed it, it's Mulvaney's public celebration of playing a woman for 1 full year, which he commemorated with a live stream from New York City's Rockefeller Center, featuring other LGBT activists and a Disney princess routine. Bud Light decided that this is precisely the sort of thing that the sort of guys who drink Bud Light would wish to sell. Where are these guys' brains? Where are their heads? Would sell, and thus Mulvaney's made-up male face now smiles at them from the side of their beer cans. Mulvaney, by the way, isn't just another random TikTok star. His shtick has landed him an interview with the President Joe Biden and feverish acclaims from progressives across America. I'll bet he's getting a lot of cash for the Bud Light deal also. Is it just me, or do I feel like I'm on a different planet? As conservative pundit John Cardillo asked, who at a beer company said thought it was a good idea to make a grown man who dresses like little girls their new spokesperson. Brands have to stop listening to their woke creative teams and get in touch with their consumer demographics. They won't, of course. This isn't about the customers. and certainly isn't about the sort of guys who buy Bud Light and watch sports. It's about Bud Light attempting to brand themselves as more than a beer. They are now the sort of company that is willing to put a man identifying as a woman on a beer can in order to promote the 1-year anniversary of that man identifying as a woman. That's not brand promotion, that's rebranding. Ask me, it's stupid. As for their customers, who might not want to see Mulvaney leering at them while they take a swig, shut up, give us your money, and drink, bigot. That's what they're going to say. Bud Light, like many other companies, is ashamed of their customer base. The Babylon Bee's satirical coverage is hard to beat. Here's what they said. Beverage pretending to be beer features man pretending to be woman. From that perspective, the Bee noted, the partnership makes perfect sense. That's in the news for tonight. I wish, and there's lots of great news out there, obviously. I'm giving you news that relates to prophecy, and sometimes it's hard to hear. But I want you to be aware. I want you to be aware economically, politically, and yes, morally, of what's going on, and for Israel. But today is a sad day for America. We're watching it slip more and more away. It's one of the reasons why I believe revival has to happen. I'm not sure it will, but it has to. We need God more than we need everything else. Maybe all this junk and all this sin will push people to find something else. Because obviously they're putting their bucket down a well, which you'll hear about tonight, and they're coming up empty.